From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, the Technology Secretary Peter Kyle has told LBC work to make the UK's energy sector as resilient as possible is unrelenting. A massive power cut is still causing chaos across Spain and Portugal. Public transport networks are closed, some flights have been disrupted, and phone lines and cash machines have been knocked out. Mr Kyle has been speaking to Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC.
What we're doing is making sure that we have as much resilience in our system, our energy system, as possible. I brought forward a cybersecurity bill, which I'm working on at the moment. We're working really hard to make sure that all of our systems, whether it's the cyber systems or it is the physical infrastructure of our country, is protected from whether it be atmospheric or whether it be cyber attacks. Now, I can reassure people that this work is unrelenting.
The White House says it wants a permanent ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine after Vladimir Putin announced a 3-day pause next week. It will coincide with VE Day celebrations and a large military parade in Moscow. US President Donald Trump said to be growing increasingly frustrated with a lack of movement on a more long-term peace deal. He wants Ukraine to recognise Russia's annexation of Crimea. But former US Ambassador to Ukraine, Joseph Pennington's, told Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC, it's not up to him.
Obviously, it puts President Zelensky in a difficult position because he's sort of forced to either contradict what the president has said or else make a concession that he's obviously not at this point in a position to make.
Education groups and trade unions are calling for a delay to plan changes to Ofsted's school inspection system. There are concerns the reform from single-word judgments to a report card system will make inspections even more unreliable. Professor Julia Waters' sister Ruth Wood took her own life when the school she was head teacher of had its one-word rating downgraded.
What is proposed seems solely to be trying to shoehorn more information into an already overloaded system in order to address part of the problem, but does not begin to address the high stakes for teachers.
The Department for Education says the changes will give parents more information. A teenager who stabbed 3 people at a school in Carmarthenshire has been sentenced to 15 years in youth detention. The 14-year-old attacked 2 teachers and a pupil in Ammanford in April last year. Sir Sadiq Khan wants to bring the Olympics to London again in 2040. A report has found the staging of 6 major sports events last year generated £230 million for the city. The Vatican says the conclave to elect the new Pope will begin next Wednesday. 135 cardinals from across the world will begin a series of secretive votes to find a successor to Pope Francis.
LBC Business Update.
With Bitdefender Cybersecurity, your ultimate digital protection. Trusted always.
The Prime Minister has told LBC he can't commit to pay rises for some public sector workers in England. Sir Keir Starmer says he needs to look at increases in the round. It's reported the pay review body for teachers will recommend a 4% rise, but the government has only budgeted for 2.8%. Marks & Spencer's told agency staff at a key logistics site to stay at home. Disruption from a cyber attack has entered a second week. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 2 points at 84.17. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.17. LBC weather dry with clear spells and light winds for most of us tonight. Outbreaks of rain in the very north of Scotland. Mist and fog will be possible with lows dropping to 7 degrees. Tomorrow, there's plenty more warm sunshine. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Elizabeth Secker.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Call Kemi. Put your questions to the leader of the Conservative Party now. Call 0345 6060 973.
But is it Call Kemi with a C or a K? C, I think. Kemi Badenoch is here to take your calls over the next hour. We, of course, have only got 3 days till polling day in the local elections in most parts of England, not all, but most. So it's your chance to put your questions to the leader of the Conservative Party. Kemi, welcome.
Thank you.
You've been on the campaign trail today in deepest, darkest Lincolnshire, I guess because there's a mayoral election there and Reform UK are snapping at your heels.
Well, I've been everywhere, and it was sunny and bright Lincolnshire, actually. And I met some very hardy candidates who've been doing such a great job. Lincolnshire has one of the best performance ratings for adult social care, for example, and it's a reminder of what these elections on Thursday are about. They're not an opinion poll. It's about who's going to be running public services in these areas, who's going to fix the roads, who's going to collect the bins, who's going to, look after children with special educational needs. And I'm trying to remind people that across the board, Conservative councils deliver better services for lower taxes.
Right, well, we've got lots of questions on the board already. If you'd like to put a call to Kemi, it's 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp that number as well, and you can text 84850. And, of course, you can watch the entire hour on Global Player. Well, let's go to our first caller. It is Daniel in Golders Green. Daniel, hi.
Hi, Ian, and hi, Kemi.
Hi.
Kemi, after 14 years of betrayal on key issues like taxes and immigration, why should former Conservative voters like me, who've now switched to Reform, ever trust your party again and ever help you get into power again?
All right, thank you. That's a great first question. And I would start off by saying that we've acknowledged that we got things wrong. There were many things that happened, especially in the last few years, that I disagreed with. Immigration is far too high. The tax burden is far too high. There were good things that we did over 14 years. Otherwise, we would not have been elected repeatedly. We lost the last election, though, by a historic defeat. And one of the things that I'm trying to do now is rebuild trust with the public and remind people what authentic conservatism is all about. And it's not about rushing out with announcements, but showing that what we're doing, it has been well thought through, has a proper plan, and is in keeping with the values and principles, which I hope you share. But also looking at what the other parties are doing. People voted for change. They got change for the worse with Labour. Unemployment is rising. The tax burden is going even higher. I know that people were disappointed, but Labour has made everything worse. And right now, what we need to do is get rid of the Labour government, and Conservatives are the best offer. And I know that a lot of people are talking about, Reform and the Lib Dems as well. Let's remember there's 70 Liberal Democrats in Parliament. They are well to the left of Labour. But at the end of the day, by going with protest parties, we'd end up with people who've never run anything before, and we'd be trying it out at a time when our country really is at a crossroads and we need serious credibility.
But do you understand why people like Daniel are so disenchanted? And isn't there a real responsibility on your shoulders? Because if in the next few years, if your leadership doesn't work, and say there's another couple of leaders before the next election, because the Conservative Party does love a leadership change, and if Labour don't deliver on their policies, you can't blame people for thinking, well, let's give the Lib Dems or Reform a chance.
No, and this is not blaming anyone at all. I understand why people are disillusioned. I mean, I was in the cabinet, and there were a lot of things that I disagreed with. But at the end of the day, if you're not the Prime Minister,
how did you make that disagreement known?
Well, I told people, but I did that behind the scenes, not out in the newspapers. And if you remember this time last year, what were we reading? Endless stories about Tory infighting, rows. All of that's gone, because you need to have a space to have disagreement behind closed doors, decide on a policy, and then come out with collective responsibility. That's the way that I'm managing the party now. A lot of that has calmed down, whereas it's the other parties who are having the squabbles. Keir Starmer, Nigel Farage has lost 20% of his MPs, and there is still a long road.
To be fair, one.
Yes, there's still 20% though. If he can't manage a group of four, how's he going to manage a group of 400?
I mean, the MP that's defected from, or has been kicked out of Reform UK, Rupert Lowe, I noticed the Conservative Twitter feed today was quote tweeting Rupert Lowe. Would you take him as a Conservative MP if he wanted to be one?
So I get asked this quite a lot of the time. I got asked this about Rosie Duffield as well, who I agree with very much on issues of sex and gender. But we need people who are authentic Conservatives. We've taken people from all sorts of parties before. It hasn't worked out well. What I really want, if people are going to defect, are people who will join the Conservatives because they think we like what you're doing, we like the vision, we like where this is going. Not, I'm having a row with my party, can I join you so I can spite them? That's what I call a negative defection. We've got to stop this thing of people just planning whatever they can do to get elected and start looking at what we're doing to deliver for
your party
people.
Twitter feed quote tweeted Rupert Lowe today. It's showing a bit of ankle to him, isn't it?
No, I think he might have. I haven't seen what this is. Maybe he said something sensible.
I'll show you.
We quote tweet people all the time. We do that with Labour, but he's being quote tweeted because he's criticising Nigel Farage, and we agree with him on that. But at the end of the day, we're not going to get a better country unless we remove the Labour government. And the only way to do that, in my view, is to vote Conservative. If we do not unite a large coalition of people behind conservatism, we're going to end up with more Labour. Just look at what's happening in Birmingham. This is the kind of incompetence we're seeing across the country. Rubbish piled up in the streets. This is our second city. Rats running around everywhere. And the council unable to deal with it. I was in Wiltshire, and I'm going there again tomorrow. The council there also had bin strikes. Dealt with it. No one heard anything. And this is what I'm talking about, that you need delivery and experience.
Daniel in Golders Green, are you convinced?
No, thank you, Ian. I'm not convinced. Kemi, I hear what you say, and I appreciate that you acknowledge the issues on high taxes and immigration, but I don't believe you. And you know, I didn't leave the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party left me. I was out knocking on doors, canvassing. I put thousands of hours in to help you, and all I got back was betrayal. I got tax rise after tax rise after tax rise. I got, you know, just one thing after another, and it's too late. It's too late.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't believe it's too late. I'm going to be the leader, and I'm one of the people who is fighting for the things that you asked for. And what we need to show right now is that there is only one real centre-right party. I hear a lot of things that Reform says to win over Labour voters. This is what the Liberal Democrats did. Said one thing in the south and another thing in the north, one thing to the right, another thing to the left. And I think that there's going to be more disappointment. You have to look at who is leading the party. I am not somebody who just says whatever to get elected. I tell the truth, even when it's painful, even when people criticise me. But in the long run, I'm often seen to be right, as we've seen with that Supreme Court judgment or the kneecap issue, which we'll talk about later. But what I will do, Daniel, is start showing you more so that you can regain that faith. I know that a lot of people are very disillusioned, but it's not just words that's going to convince people. It's also got to be action as well.
Daniel, what's the one thing that Kemi could do or say that would make you think again?
That's a great question, Ian. I would say a coherent, well-funded, properly costed policy on tax cuts to generate growth. I'm not talking about Liz Truss. I'm talking about a really well-thought-through plan to generate growth by cutting taxes.
All right, we're going to be working on that. We've got our policy commissions set up. But you're absolutely right. The growth that we need in the country will only come from business. It doesn't come from government. This is one of the differences between us and Labour, this belief that government creates growth. It doesn't. And what we saw with Labour's last budget was punishing taxes, NI rises, and all sorts of increases that mean that the businesses I've been visiting all around the country are closing. They're not hiring new staff. They're not giving pay rises. And growth is actually going to get weaker, not stronger.
Daniel, thank you. Let's go to Murdo in Achtermachty in Scotland. Hello, Murdo.
Good evening, Ian. How you doing?
Good, thank you. What would you like to ask Kemi?
Hi, Kemi. How are you getting on?
Very well, thank you.
Good. My question is, what is the benefit of keeping Robert Jenrick in the Shadow Cabinet? Would it not be better to send him off packing to join Reform to be a thorn in the side of Nigel Farage?
So thank you. I don't think that would be the right thing to do because Robert is a very hard-working member of the Shadow Cabinet. He's got a lot of energy. He ran the London Marathon yesterday, so I think he's got his feet put up today. But people often look for drama in politics. Robert Jenrick was saying something which I've said, that we need to unite that coalition of voters that used to vote Conservative. We wasn't talking about a pact with Reform. And I remember when I appointed him Justice Secretary, I got criticised for doing that. People saying, oh, you should be giving him a bigger job. But he's holding Labour's feet to the fire. And what I really want people to see is that we have a strong team. We can have different opinions and still work together without rowing. And this is not a one-man band or a one-woman band. This is a party that relies on quite a lot of people to deliver. And that's what the country is going to need.
So you don't think he's on manoeuvres?
No.
Really? Because everyone else does.
Well, I know, but you know what happens with leadership contests? Blair and Brown, for instance, Boris and Rishi, we always have the drama of, oh, this person's trying to take your job. And I'm somebody who's not really moved by that. I remember when I was business secretary, I'd open the papers and I'd read stories about how I was plotting, I had leadership activities carrying on. All of it was rubbish. But you just need an anonymous person to say something and it becomes front page news. So because I had that experience, I, understand what it's like to be another hardworking person on the front bench.
OK, Murdo, good try. Thank you very much indeed. We'll take more of your calls in a moment to Kemi Badenoch, 0345 6060 973. It's 16 minutes past 7.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
17 minutes past 7 on LBC. Someone has texted here, she is nothing but an argumentative culture warrior. The thing is, if you weren't argumentative, people say, well, why doesn't she take the fight to Labour? Do you get frustrated with that kind of talk?
No, I've realised that being a politician means just getting criticism. It doesn't matter what you do. Someone somewhere will be unhappy. And that's why you've got to have your own conviction and follow, your heart, follow your own beliefs and principles.
Right, let's take a call from Chris in Richmond. Chris, hello.
Evening, Ian. Evening, Kemi. The Conservative Party always talks about the future and providing opportunities. My children are Spanish speakers, their mother tongue is Spanish. You're opposing a youth mobility scheme. Why would you do that to take away life-changing opportunities for kids like mine and many other people in my area?
So we would love for young people in our country to be able to go not just to the EU, but all around the world, improve their language skills. I mean, if they have a Spanish mother, they probably already have the right to go to Spain. There are many other countries around the world that they can do that. The issue is what exactly is being negotiated. An EU youth mobility scheme sounds great until you start looking at the detail of what Labour's likely negotiating. And I know this because when I was Trade Secretary, I saw the details of what the EU wanted, and it wasn't good. It wasn't something that would benefit UK students. It sounds great, but going up to age 30, we could end up with lots of unemployed people coming to the UK at a time that unemployment is increasing in our country. The costs were also not clear, and also we have an issue at the moment with manning borders, including with the EU. Wanting to make sure that we can keep control of our borders, I think, is absolutely important, and we don't want this to be yet another backdoor door for the migration that we don't want. But do we want children like yours to have the best opportunities, wonderful experiences? Absolutely. But we can do that without having a reversal of freedom of movement, which is one of the things that mobility scheme looked like.
But in terms of the principle of it, I mean, if you could negotiate it in the proper way, so there's got to be give and take in any negotiation. But if the EU was willing to cap the number of 18 to 30-year-olds coming here and having some sort of reciprocal deal, what's not to like about that?
Well, we have to start looking at countries on an individual basis. There is a big difference, as we can see from a lot of statistics, between taking a student from France or Germany and taking one from Albania or Romania. There's no distinguishing between that. That's one of the problems we had when we had free movement. One of our new policies that I've introduced is making sure that we take people from countries where we can ensure that they are being net contributors to the UK. That's not the same across the board for the EU. So when we use the word EU, everyone thinks of the easy countries rather than the more difficult ones. So that's one thing. But the second thing, and the thing that really worries me, is that Labour doesn't know how to negotiate. You only need to look at what they did with the Chagos Islands. They gave the unions a great deal, didn't get anything in return. And the way I see Labour negotiating across the board is that they surrender everything and then hope that the other party is nice to them. That's not going to work for our country. So yes, of course, if there is a great scheme that works for the UK, absolutely. But it's what they're negotiating right now that really worries me. I don't think it's going to be good.
Chris?
Well, how do you know exactly what they negotiate? You said the same about trade deals, Kemi. You seem to shoot your mouth off on these things without really thinking about it. Fundamentally, in my area, Twickenham, there are many, many, many people that like learning languages, want to spend time abroad. I now have a senior job in a pharma company. I speak 2 languages fluently, partly because I had the opportunity when I was 19 and again when I was 25 with a big accountancy firm to go and work without any problems and any visas. You want to make life more difficult for young people and for businesses. You tie people up in red tape, and I think it's the wrong decision. And I will never vote Conservative as long as you continue to fix these principles, Kemi.
I'm not sure you ever have, Chris, though, have you?
No, but I would have voted for David Cameron in 2015. I seriously thought about it. But I'm telling you now that many people I know that would have voted Tory in the past, including Tory councillors in my area that have quit the party, because of your attitude to Europe. People are unhappy about it.
Well, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but you can still go to Europe. You can still work. You can still learn a language. We do it in a different way. But you ask me, how do I know the details? It's because I was in government. I saw what the EU was asking for. We said no. We wanted a youth mobility scheme that would work for the UK. We have mobility schemes with other countries. But what we cannot have is freedom of movement, where we end up paying for a lot more people than we can actually afford, and where there isn't really the reciprocity because the demand on our side isn't there. These are things that we've gone through in great detail. On the surface, there is absolutely no difference between us in terms of what it is we're talking about. But in terms of the detail of how to make it work, what you have described is not what Labour's doing, so I can't support that.
Just to pick up on one point that Chris made there about the Liberals, Democrats, because the whole media seems to concentrate and always ask you about reform, and I'm sure we'll get a couple of questions on that a bit later. But in the south of England, reform are not necessarily your main opponents. The Liberal Democrats are. So surely you've got to be careful of not just trying to appeal to ex-Conservatives who've gone to reform, but you've also got to appeal to ex-Conservatives who've gone to the Liberal Democrats. And there were a hell of a lot of those at the last general election. What can you offer them?
So you're absolutely right. And this is the point I make every time I'm asked a question about reform. It almost feels like that's the only party that the media want to talk about. But the situation is we are now in a very competitive political environment. Every party is taking votes off every other party. And we are no longer in the ascendant the way we were when it just felt like there were 2 parties competing. We need to adapt to that. But how you do that is by occupying the common ground. People often ask me, should we move to the right or should we move to the left? Actually, a lot of things that we can do are common sense. I remember seeing a poll where 54% of the people who left Conservatives to go to the Liberal Democrats were actually leaving because they were annoyed about immigration policy. So talking about immigration doesn't mean that you're just looking for reform voters. People are complex. But we have to make sure that we are speaking in a way that people understand what the principles and values where we are offering are. When we talk about immigration, for instance, we need to explain that we're trying to create an inheritance for the next generation, that we need to do what we can afford, look after those people who are, desperate in need, but not allowing our asylum routes, for example, to be exploited by economic migrants. Explaining what we're trying to deliver, I think, is a lot better than what we ended up doing towards the end of the last Conservative government, which was talking about the policy in a very dry, technocratic fashion, and people didn't understand what we stood for.
Chris, thank you very much for your question. Let's go to Mohammed in Ealing. Good evening, Mohammed. What would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening, Ian, and good evening, Kemi. It's a pleasure speaking to both of you, and so it's a pleasure speaking to you, Ian. First and foremost, I just wanted to say it's quite a shame that he wasn't elected back in September 2022. I think the country would have been in a much better place, Kemi. My question to you is, and no worries. My question to you is, and your Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, has highlighted this on numerous occasions. The last 14 years of Conservative governance has unfortunately collapsed the criminal justice system. And currently, I live in the London Borough of Ealing in London, and my police force is the Metropolitan Police Force, and it's had several reports about it, like the Baroness cases reports. And how can we root out corruption? How can we bring the criminal justice back to the pioneering leadership of the United Kingdom? After all, we came up with the Magna Carta, we came out with rule of law, and at the moment, it feels like we have a two-tier police system. And also, I have uncovered enormous amounts of corruption at both police and the Home Office, and I've tried to share it with yourself and Robert Jenrick as well by email as a whistleblower, and that's never ever succeeded. But the question is, how can we get the policing in the UK greatness back into it?
Okay, thank you very much. There was a lot in your question, but I'll start off with the general point about the criminal justice system. You are right. The situation around criminal justice is not ideal. We've actually seen the situation where Labour has been letting prisoners out early just to create space in the prison system. No, we didn't actually. No, we didn't. We didn't. Not what they've done. We definitely didn't.
Not as much, but it certainly started under the last government.
The issue on overcrowding was with us, but we had plans to use overseas jails, for example. But it was Labour that just let offenders out, including one who killed someone on the day that he was released. I mean, that is astonishing. One of the first things we need to do is build more prisons. I remember when we started on a prison building program early 2020, COVID came, and there's so much that should have happened, which COVID stopped. But Labour now needs to pick up where we left off and start looking at building new prison places. But more generally, a backlog that was created in the court system needs a lot more attention and a lot more money. We can fix quite a lot of what's going wrong in the criminal justice system with better funding, for example. There are things which Labour has been talking about that I'm not quite sure will be a good idea. Removing juries, for example, I'm a bit suspicious about that. I think we need to see a lot more detail. But the principle that you're talking about, Mohammed, is absolutely correct. This is a country that has always emphasized equality under the law. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor or black or white, you should be treated by the system in exactly the same way. And a lot of people don't feel that is the case. I remember when I first started out in politics, the two-tier policing people criticized was actually against ethnic minorities. Now it's gone the other way. Lots of people complaining about stop and search, something which I'm a fan of. But you look at some of the cases that we've read about in the papers, and it does seem like there's certain crimes which the police or the CPS find easier to chase than others. And we need to make sure that people have Yes, but they should be focused on the most serious things, the things that prevent, actually preventing crime, not just ticking boxes. There's no point, for example, going over to a Telegraph journalist house, as we saw with Alison Pearson, to say, we didn't like your tweet. What crime could have been prevented if they weren't wasting time like that? And that's why we've brought in new policies like scrapping non-crime hate incidents. We tried to give guidelines when we were a government. The police don't follow them. But there is a lot that needs to change around criminal justice. And this is one of the things that our policy commissions will look to fix.
In the end, I think a lot of what Mohammed is talking about, when he talks about the collapse of the criminal justice system, I think what he means is that the lack of funding for different parts of it. I was in a cab the other day. The driver was an LBC listener. And he started talking. He said, "Do you ever talk about the probation service on your programme?" And I said, "Yeah, from time to time." He said, "Well, I was a probation officer. I'd done the job for 20 years. I had to quit because I was working from 8 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the morning, 5 days a week, and I couldn't do it anymore. And now I'm driving a cab." And when somebody said, and this guy, he was a very, very intelligent guy, and you could just tell that there was a lot of heartache there, that he was devoted to what he was doing, but couldn't continue with it because he didn't feel the system supported people like him.
Well, I think that funding is one of the things that needs looking at. I think that we've tried to create efficiencies, but some of those efficiencies have neglected things that are not necessarily very obvious. And I mean, it's really sad to hear that story about the probation officer. We see it in prison offices as well, where it almost looks like some of the criminals are getting jobs as prison officers so that they can smuggle things in.
But the point is, if you're being paid, say, 25 grand a year to be a prison officer, less than the average salary in the country, from one of the most difficult jobs, one of the most pressurised jobs, it's not surprising that they can't recruit people.
Well, but this goes to the fundamental point. The money for all of these public services comes from the taxpayer, and we are not getting the sort of tax receipts that we need to get because the economy is not growing, and the demand for public services is increasing, but the supply of money is not increasing. And that is why whatever we do to get the country back on track is going to have to start with the economy. Fixing the economy is the answer to almost all of the problems which we've been talking about, and that is why I'm quite worried about the direction of travel. When you look at the statistics, unemployment going up, growth being halved, business confidence, at rock bottom. We are not creating jobs. We're not increasing profit. And that is having an impact on public services. I'm not saying it was great under the Conservatives. We wanted it to be better. It wasn't, but it is getting a lot worse under Labour.
Was anything great when you were a cabinet minister?
Yes. And the funny thing is, people, it's one of those things, there's a recency bias where people remember the most recent thing rather than everything that happened over 14 years. What we did on education, especially in England, really phenomenal, shot up the international rankings. How we managed the economy post the financial crisis, it was really tough, but we could have been in a really bad place where we wouldn't have been able to withstand COVID, which I do think Boris Johnson did very well. The war in Ukraine came along as well. We had several once-in-a-generation events just happening during the course of that 14 years. But I'm so glad that it was Conservatives that were around rather than Jeremy Corbyn. Imagine what the war in Ukraine would have been like if Jeremy Corbyn had been Prime Minister, or how we would have managed COVID. And there's so much that I can talk about in my own personal portfolios, bad things that you stop. No one ever notices the bad things that didn't happen because, they didn't happen. But I know that there is a lot that we needed to change, especially in terms of being authentic Conservatives, focused on the traditional low-tax, efficient public services and, low immigration. That's what we need to get back to again.
Right, 30 more minutes to ask your questions to Kemi Badenoch, 0345 6060 973. It's 7:32 news headlines with Elizabeth Secker.
Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has told LBC a youth mobility scheme with the EU would not benefit UK students. She says it would actually threaten freedom of movement. There are reports the Labour government is considering a deal with Europe. The Technology Secretary Peter Kyle has told LBC the government would be prepared if there was a massive power cut like the one that's hit Spain and Portugal today. Phone lines, cash machines, public transport and even water supplies have been affected. Spain's Prime Minister is holding an emergency meeting and says the cause of the outage is not yet known. Russia says it will observe a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine next week. President Putin is urging Kyiv to do the same between May the 8th and 10th. It coincides with a huge military parade in Moscow, marking 80 years since the end of the Second World War in Europe. LBC weather dry with clear spells and light winds for most of us tonight. Outbreaks of rain in the very north of Scotland. Mist and fog is possible with lows dropping to 7 degrees.
This is LBC.
Terms apply.
This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
7:35 on LBC. Kemi Badenoch is here taking your calls. I'm going to play my joker here and ask a question myself on kneecap. Not kneecapping, because that's something rather different. Can you give the background to this? Because this is about a rap group who've called for Tory MPs to be killed, and they support Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, this goes back to your time in government. There was a court case, and I know you've had some fairly outspoken things to say, so give the background to that.
When I was Business and Trade Secretary, I was also in charge of grants to businesses, and one of them happened to be a music export grant to help music businesses export across the world. And the application came from this band called Kneecap, and I saw that this was a band that had lots of anti-British lyrics. It was a pro-IRA. I think it's a Northern Irish band. Really horrific lyrics, promoting violence. And I thought, well, that's not what we should be exporting. I'm not giving them any money. And they took me to court. Said they were going to sue the government for not giving them money to go and export. Now, the government doesn't owe anybody money. This is a nice thing that the Conservative government was doing, giving out grants. So the court case had been lodged, and in between the court in between the court case starting and finishing, the snap election was called. So I didn't get to see it through. Labour come in. Johnny Reynolds, the new Business and Trade Secretary, just gives them the money and says, "We're not fighting this court case. They're going to have let them have the money." And I just thought, this is extraordinary. This is how money is wasted across the board in government. Now, the amount was about 15,000 or so. It's not that much, but there are loads of decisions like this that happen in government, just wasting taxpayers' money. Now the band has been found to be promoting terrorism and also calling for MPs, Tory MPs specifically, to be killed. This is a prosecutable offence. It's incitement to violence, incitement to murder. But also, when you look at some of the people who were jailed for sending tweets after the Southport killings, I mean, I'm not justifying what they said, but this is a much worse incident, and I think should feel the full force of the law. One member said, "The only good Tory is a dead Tory. Kill your local MP." And this was 9 months after Sir David Amess was killed. I think it's absolutely disgusting that anyone would say that. Sir David's family are still grieving. I think his daughter Katie has seen that very upset.
She was sat in that chair for an hour a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and then this band is now playing in Glastonbury. I don't think they should be playing in Glastonbury. They should be, arraigned in front of a court for what it is they've said, and they should give the money back to the government. If they don't like Britain and they don't like UK taxpayers, then they should give the money back.
OK. Let's go to Lorcan, who's a first-time caller in Maidstone. Hello, Lorcan.
Hi. So my question for Kemi Badenoch, thank you for taking my call, would be, as an aspirational young person, as far as I can see, you have no policies that would benefit me as a moderate voter. I mean, your rejection of an EU youth scheme continues this destructive perusal of isolationist European policy, which in turn isolates us young people from engaging with our closest neighbours. So my question really would be, what specific policies do you have that would win my vote?
All right. Well, I firmly believe that we need to get more young people voting Conservative because we are a party that believes in aspiration. We want you to do well. We want you to go around the world and have wonderful experiences. And you can do that. The EU mobility scheme, as it's been negotiated, is not something that's going to work out for the UK. It's going to be imbalanced. It's not going to deliver the exact same benefits as what we used to have, but it will have greater costs. That's why we oppose it. We don't oppose young people going to the EU and having good experiences and even finding work, but we do oppose bad deals that aren't good for the UK. And that's one of the things that I have to do for young people as well, because it's also your money. But in terms of what sort of offer we will have for young people, we're going to make sure that you can have homes that you can afford. We're going to make sure that you can leave university or leave college, leave school, get a job that actually pays well, which leaves you with a disposable income.
How can you do that?
It's all about growing the economy.
You can't guarantee that people will be able to afford to buy homes. You can't guarantee that people will have jobs. I mean, they're nice words, but in practical terms, what can you offer Lorcan?
Well, but that's where we have to start from. We have to start from what the aspiration is. I'm not in government now, and, we have to make sure that the policies themselves are fully thought through, but that's where we need to go. If you can't deliver affordable housing and good jobs, then you shouldn't be in government. Everybody who's applying to be in government should be able to do that. But we also need to make sure that young people have an inheritance, and those of us who are alive now need to make sure we're giving something to the next generation and the one after. And what worries me is that we're spending all the money, the debt is accumulating. You look at the amount that we're spending on debt. We're spending more on defence, more on debt than on defence, than on education. That means that there's not going to be anything left for young people. We've got to fix that.
So do you support Angela Rayner's attempts to reform the planning system, ones which Michael Gove gave up on? Because if he had taken those reforms through, there would be many houses being built today that aren't being built. I mean, there are councils in your constituency who are preventing new houses from being built because of the planning system.
Well, this is one of the things that has been a challenge. We need to make sure the homes are built in the right place with the right infrastructure. A lot of opposition to housing comes because the infrastructure is not there, and there are many people who are opposed to new housing because they think that the housing is just for new arrivals to the UK rather than the people who are already in the country or in the community. We've got to get that right. And you would probably remember when I was the Shadow Housing Secretary briefly last year, I had a debate with Angela Rayner and I said, we want to see homes built, but you're not going to be able to deliver it. And now we know that they are well behind, so they made promises that they can't deliver. Let's see what liberalisation they're bringing to planning. But I suspect, as we see with Labour, that they say things without a plan and then they work out how to do it as they go along, which means the thing will not get delivered. That's what worries me, and that's terrible for young people.
Lorcan, thank you very much. Hassan's in Cambridge. Hassan, hi, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, hello, hi. So, irregular boat arrivals are about 3% of the 1.2 million gross migrants to the UK. Do you regret making Stop the Boats as a key slogan, and why do you continue to demonize people fleeing war-torn countries?
We don't demonise people who are fleeing war-torn countries, but we want them to do so legally. And it doesn't matter if it's only... Well, there are routes. There are legal routes, but quite a lot of the people that we're seeing are economic migrants. They're not fleeing war-torn countries. We have gangs that are exploiting asylum rules and refugee convention rules from over half a century ago. We have to sort that out. That's one of the reasons why we're going to be looking at a lot of the international law which is impeding us doing the right thing, probably starting with the Human Rights Act. But going back to the question which your listener was asking, immigration is far, far too high. Legal immigration has been far too high. Illegal immigration has been far too high. So no, I don't regret saying that we should stop the boats. We absolutely have to. Many of the people coming here are breaking the rules. They're disappearing into the economy. They're not contributing to the UK, and we have to pay for it. We just heard, for instance, that Keir Starmer via Serco is going to be renting homes, taking homes off the market for up to 5 years to house people. Who's paying for that? That's not right.
But in terms of legal migration, surely it's the economy, it's business that determines the level of legal migration, because there is a point system. So the fact that last year it was at its highest level, I mean, how would you reduce that without harming the economy?
So this is one of the fundamental things that needs fixing. We cannot be an economy that needs immigration to grow. Other economies are successful and grow without immigration. We need to look at training up people here. We have so many people out of work. I think about 6 million people out of work, or is it 9 million? I've forgotten the exact figure, depending on how you calculate it. That is not sustainable. It's getting to the point where every single person who is working is paying for another person who isn't working. And remember, I was business secretary. I heard business say, "Oh, we need people from across the world in order to grow the economy." If it was high-skilled migration, no one would be complaining. But a lot of it is low-skilled migration, people who end up being net recipients of welfare. That cannot be right.
But if British people aren't prepared to do the jobs, where are employers going to find people?
We need to get them to be prepared. We can't just say, oh, well, they're not prepared to do the jobs, so we'll just keep bringing more and more people from abroad. And I say this as someone with an immigrant background myself. This is not sustainable. This country will not continue to be great if we keep bringing in more and more low-skilled migration while the highly skilled people are leaving. We're losing millionaires and billionaires, entrepreneurs. Lots of people are leaving. Young people are leaving. They're going everywhere else. They're going to the US, they're going to the Middle East. That's what are we going to end up with if the highly skilled people leave and the unskilled people come in?
What's the legal route from someone fleeing the war in Sudan?
There are legal routes, and we are not able to save every single person, who is fleeing a war-torn country. We cannot look after the entire world. We are an island of 60, 70 million people. We don't have the capacity to absorb that, and we also have a welfare state, very, very high standards, which means that there's a big difference between someone in Sudan seeking asylum in a nearby country and the expectations there, and what they get here, which is thousands and thousands in welfare, in rented accommodation, in legal fees. Who is paying for that? It's the average British worker who doesn't get the public services they need. We've just been talking about the criminal justice system and how we don't have enough money for it. We're never going to have money for it if we keep giving money to people who don't live in this country.
Right, 15 more minutes with Kemi Badenoch. If you'd like to ask her a question, 0345 6060 973. It's 7:46.
This is LBC.
Fees apply.
Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
7:49 on LBC. Text question from Thomas. Who's had a more successful first 100 days, Donald Trump or Keir Starmer? You can't say neither.
I can say neither. It depends on what it is you want to see. If you want to see economic growth, I think Trump started out well, but the tariffs have had a serious impact on the U.S. economy. I don't think Keir Starmer had a good 100 days at all. You know, he lost Sue Gray, for example. He had to sack his transport secretary. His corruption minister is still under investigation, maybe being extradited to Bangladesh. The economy is not going well. The budget failed. So Keir Starmer has definitely had a terrible 100 days. Donald Trump, I don't agree with what he's doing on trade. I think it's absolutely wrong. And I definitely disagree with what he's been doing on Ukraine. But he has an agenda, feels like economic nationalism, and he's pursuing it, and people know where he's going most of the time.
What would it say, though, if Keir Starmer got a trade deal out of Donald Trump when, in however long you were trade secretary, you didn't?
I wouldn't say anything at all. We negotiated with Donald Trump. We got very near the end. President Biden came in and said, we don't want trade deals with any countries, not the UK, not Canada, not anybody. And if the other party doesn't want to negotiate, there's nothing you can do about that. So that is why I've been saying that, Keir Starmer needs to pick up where we left off and actually conclude a UK-US trade deal. It'll be great for the UK. It'll be great for the US. 1 million people in the UK work for US companies and vice versa. There's a lot of mutual benefit. But he cannot and should not make concessions that put us in a worse position or even just get us to where we were last month before the tariffs came in.
And when you look at Donald Trump's remarks on Ukraine, do you sit there sort of with your head in your hands? You can't believe, I just can't believe some of the things that he said.
It's very depressing. And I think the worst moment was that press conference. Do you remember that extraordinary press conference where we saw President Zelensky just sort of being barracked in the White House? However, after the scenes from the Vatican, it looks like positive signals are emerging. I've always said that Zelensky is the hero in this war. Putin is not an ally. He's the aggressor. He doesn't like freedom.
So why can't Trump see that?
Well, it sounds like he's starting to see it. There was some stuff I heard that he put on social media about how it looks like I think Putin had been stringing him along. So let's see where we get to. I think those are positive signals.
But he said today that Ukraine is close to accepting that it can't keep Crimea. Again, if you're playing honest broker, a bizarre thing to say.
Well, he says a lot of things, doesn't he? So let's see what actually happens rather than what he just said.
But presumably you think that Ukraine should keep Crimea?
Of course. I have always felt, and this was something that I got from Boris Johnson, the territorial integrity for Ukraine was really important. And I haven't seen any reason to change my mind. If Russia gets a win, then it's going to try again somewhere else and keep going.
And the Canadian elections are happening today. We're going to be talking about that in the last hour of the programme. And again, he's undermined the Conservative leader in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, by basically saying that Canadians should vote for him, and he must know that will be counterproductive. Aren't you worried that he might do the same to you?
Well, this is one of the reasons why we advise people not to comment on elections in other countries and say you'll work with whoever's going to win. It's because you don't want to have an accidental influence one way or another on the results, especially how some of these pronouncements can be counterproductive. I've met Pierre Poilievre. I think he is fantastic. I think he would be a very, very good Prime Minister. I haven't met Mark Carney before. Obviously, we know him as a former Bank of England governor, and he's got a bit of a mixed record there. But at the end of the day, I think just coming out to say this is what people should vote for is crossing the line, and we'll see what happens in the Canadian elections. I think the most interesting thing for me is looking at a Conservative leader of the opposition in Canada who was 20 points ahead just a couple of months ago, and all of that's changed. And it just goes to show how, a week is a long time in politics. You can't predict anything. You've just got to stay true to your values, to your principles, do the right thing, be honest with the public, and hope that lasts the course. Charlie's in Goole. Hello, Charlie.
Hi, both. Hi, Ian. Hi, Kemi.
Hi.
Hello.
What would you like to ask?
My question is this. Given Britain is, a little bit broken. Do you think Margaret Thatcher's neoliberalism experiment has failed?
I don't think that we can blame Margaret Thatcher for what's happening in the world today, and certainly not in the UK today. I think Margaret Thatcher rescued this country from some very, very dark times in the 1970s. Again, we're seeing it coming back. Rubbish piled up on the streets, as we see in Birmingham. This is one of the reasons why I keep telling everyone you've got to vote Conservative, because we deliver better services for lower taxes. And I'm hoping that that's what will happen on Thursday. It's going to be challenging, but to blame Mrs. Thatcher, in my view, is wrong. We have to start taking responsibility for what's going on. Margaret Thatcher brought a lot of growth to the UK, and I believe that that's what this country needs right now, a focus on who creates the growth. That's business. It's not government that creates growth, and that means lifting some of the burden on business.
Charlie, thank you. Ralph is in Hastings. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, Iain. Hello, Kemi. Thank you very much for having me on the programme. May I say, Kemi, I'm a deep admirer of you, and thank you for all the work you've done for the Conservative Party. I do think you are a great champion for common sense and for genuine, authentic Conservative values. So thank you very much for that. You won the leadership election against Robert Jenrick on a basis of trying to discover Conservative principles and values. Again, I deeply admire that. Can you outline for the viewers and the listeners what exactly it means to be a Conservative in the modern age, and what are your core Conservative values? And can you actually establish those values? And as a consequence of that, will there be natural outgrowths of Conservative policy? Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and do that as snappily as possible. So my probably most treasured Conservative value is personal responsibility. I think it's one of the things that distinguishes us from the other parties, especially the parties on the left, who believe that the state is the answer to everything. Another one is family. We need strong families to create a strong society. When families are weakened, when the state gets involved, when families are broken, it has so many negative consequences, not least of all, you look at the prison population, many of them come from troubled families, broken families. Equality under the law is another one. We don't believe in splitting people into lots of different groups, protected groups or whatever you might call them, and having different laws based on that. Labour does that, and it continues to do so. It's bringing in, a Race Equality Act when we already have an Equality Act. We already have racial equality in this country. But I think that many of those sorts of policies are actually very divisive. So Conservative values like sound money, fiscal competence, making sure that the books are balanced, that we live within our means, and we live within what we can earn, and allow the entrepreneurs who create the growth, create the wealth, create the jobs, which enable us to fund our public services. That's what I believe in. But if you were to wrap it up in what kind of country it is we're creating for the future, what we want to see, it is one where we leave an inheritance for the next generation. I talk about this again and again. Conservatism is about preserving the very best of our society and making sure that the next generation gets to enjoy it. Not all of us just, taking it now, or even worse, leaving them with a debt which we have incurred. We are enjoying a lot of the sacrifices made by previous generations, and I think that we need to make sacrifices for the next generation as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Last time you were on, there was a bit of a stir about some comments you made on the pensions triple lock. We had a caller who asked about...
The comments I didn't make, which your social media team got very excited about.
I think we established that you kind of did.
No, there is video evidence. We're now going to have a debate on it.
Well, let's get some clarity on this. Ian Duncan Smith thinks you should be looking at the triple lock, maybe make it a double lock. Can you say here and now exactly what your policy is on that?
So it has always been Conservative policy to have the triple lock. This was our policy over 14 years. I have not changed that. When we change policy, I have a big speech and, like the one I did on net zero, and we announce it. Now, we have to look across the board at so many things. Taxes, what's going to happen with pensions, pension legislation. So let's do the detailed work on that and then say what the policy is going to be. But as of now, no, there's no change to the triple lock.
Okay, final question from Monica in Richmond. Hello, Monica.
Hi, I'll do it quickly. So, Kemi, you've made it very clear that Keir flip-flopped on his stance on women's rights and that he proposing an apology, but it was on the Tories' watch that gender ideology was embedded in every government organisation, the media, education, police, NHS, etc., etc. Although Labour said stupid things in opposition, like trans women are women, but it was the Tories that allowed it to be embedded in every organisation. Can you take responsibility for that?
No, I won't, because actually this was one of the things that I fought against every single day that I was an MP and a minister. I did a lot, such as stopping self-ID in Scotland, for example, changing the regulations on toilets. Lots of people laughed at the time. It's now going to help with the Supreme Court legislation. And you are right that a lot of this came in while the Conservatives were in government, but it wasn't because we were in government. This is an ideology.
Well, it was Penny Mordaunt, did it?
No, actually, this ideology has taken root across the Western world. It's happened under both left and right-wing governments, and it's a social contagion in particular, which I think we need to address the root causes of. This is one of the things that I think is quite interesting, that where does government step in? So much of it didn't start in the public sector. It started out in the private sector. It also had a particularly malicious impact where we had charities like Stonewall that were misrepresenting the law and people taking, having to take their employers to court, the lower courts ruling that the wrong law was correct. That's why this case had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. So we had courts giving different interpretations of the Equality Act, and we were, as ministers, were having to deal with a confused, just confused interpretations. It wasn't easy, and to be honest, one of the reasons why so little was done, certainly until I became Equalities Minister, is because of the sheer level of abuse and vitriol that people like me got for saying, actually, this isn't right. I was called a transphobe by Labour MPs, a homophobe, a bigot. Now the Supreme Court has ruled that the gender-critical women like me and people like Rosie Duffield hounded out to the Labour Party were right. So I feel very, very strongly on this issue. But sometimes it takes more than just a government. You need a whole society to actually look at what's going on. And many people were actually denying that this problem even existed.
Take me behind the scenes at PMQ's planning last week. Who came up with the idea of saying Keir Starmer hadn't got the balls to change policy?
It was part spontaneous. It was part something that my husband had said in passing, and it was in my head. It was in my head, and I was just so angry with him, Iain. I was angry on Rosie's behalf. I know what I had to deal with. Rosie Duffield, the former Labour MP for Canterbury. She's sitting there. She's now an independent MP. I know what I had to deal with. She had it 100 times worse. And it was the people in her party who hounded her out. I had support from my party, thank goodness. But she didn't.
What did you learn from that PMQs, though? Because you've had a lot of criticism for your performances at PMQs. There, you went for him, and it worked. And I don't think even the most die-hard Labour supporter would actually give you the win last week. What lesson has that taught you?
Well, first of all, that every week gets better. It's practice. I've not been the leader of the opposition before, and lots of people have advice on what to do. The only people who've given me advice that worked have been IDS and David Cameron, people who've actually done the job before. But what happened in the moment was just this sheer anger at a man who won't answer questions, who won't acknowledge that he's ever got anything wrong, thinks he knows better than everyone else, won't apologise to someone like Rosie or even acknowledge that she's in the room. And I was just so angry. And the way he treated her is the way that he's treating the country. Like, none of you matter, only what I say goes, and actually changing what he said he believed in after creating so much confusion.
Well, we're slightly running out of time. I've got a whole list of quick-fire questions for you here, which you're probably grateful that we are running out of time. But just a couple to finish off with. Can you name anything you think the government has got right?
Well, they won an election, so that was something. And I think, to be honest, it's very, very hard. This is one of those things where, we're on such opposite sides. Every time I think about what they've been doing, I just see a whole load of wrong decisions. I think where they've picked up some of the good things that we were doing, they've got that right. But it is really hard. When I travel all around the country, people are talking about their winter fuel payment being snatched away. They're talking about how hard it is. So they haven't got very much right, I'm afraid.
Favourite world leader?
Giorgia Meloni.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why?
I've met her before. She's slightly shorter than me, so that's so I felt very, very equivalent. I met her when I was business secretary. I do love Italy, and I think her politics are very similar to my politics. She's firmly on the right. She's a mum.
She's very firmly on the right. I mean, when she came in, she was seen as an extremist.
Yeah, well, I think people have taken that back. I think we can see that she actually isn't. I think she's been very good news for Italy. So she's currently my favourite.
OK, Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much for joining us here for the last hour on LBC. Coming up in a moment, cross question. If you'd like to put a question to our panel, 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 4 minutes past 8.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has told LBC voting for protest parties means electing people who've never run anything before at a time when serious credibility is needed. She's also criticised Reform leader Nigel Farage's handling of his party.
I hear a lot of things that Reform says to win over Labour voters. This is what the Liberal Democrats did. Said one thing in the south and another thing in the north. You have to look at who is leading the party.